Hey, what's up brothers? Viper here, and today we'll go over a subject some of you guys have been asking us to do. Today we'll be talking about two-way radios, or as you may know them, walkie-talkies. Before we begin about this subject, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell button to keep notified of our upcoming videos. This way, we can keep doing what we're doing, which is to help you guys out there regarding these kind of subjects, which will not only make you guys smarter, but will also save you money because you avoid buying yourself trash. Now, we know some channels out there that have tried to give some sort of explanation or guide regarding the use of two-way radios for airsoft purpose. But since this stuff has to do with legislation, it can quickly become an illegal practice, like almost everything else that has to do with airsoft. Anyway, the things we'll mention in this video will obviously not only be for the use of radios in airsoft, but also for whatever outdoor hobbies people do for fun. So today we go over the legislation part, as well as what you should look out for when getting yourself a handheld walkie-talkie. Now, the reason why you need a radio is surely obvious, but when it comes to the use of communication in airsoft and milsim, it is somewhat essential. If you're part of an airsoft team, it can almost not be missed, but even if you're not a part of a team and just lone move through the field to enjoy a day of shooting at people, snipers, sorry. Having a radio that's connected with your team or squad gives you at least the ability to estimate the situation on the field due to the input of others, and that alone already gives you a tactical advantage. So, when it comes to legislation regarding the use of personal radios, we'll cover everything for people living in the EU. For the guys living in the USA, you want to search for what's called the FRS license-free and the GMRS licensed services. But most of the stuff we'll cover about the EU services, the radio choices and their options shall also be applicable for you guys on the other continent. So let's jump right into it. The information I'm about to mention regards handheld two-way radios or walkie-talkies. These are capable of both transmitting and receiving frequencies, which is why they are also called transceivers. As I just mentioned, these things work on certain frequencies, but the use of frequencies itself is restricted, because you don't want to end up using your local police frequency or stuff like that. For the use of such frequencies, it can either be licensed or non-licensed. Now, some companies and the authorities obviously require to use radios for whatever they do, and they use licensed frequencies. Being licensed means they are closed frequencies and may officially only be used by these companies or authorities, and others may not use them. And this is what some guys or teams prefer to do as well for airsoft purpose. But this requires a fee every few years or so. On the other side, there's also the license-free frequencies for amateur usage. In the EU, this falls under the PMR 446 service. Here PMR stands for Personal Mobile Radio, and the 446 is the frequency it operates on, namely 446 MHz. Now, in order for you to use this free service, you do need to comply on strict regulations, and that's where most people go wrong and risk being prosecuted if caught. These restrictions require you to use a radio with a power output of maximum 0.5 watts or 500 milliwatts, and in some countries like mine, the device must have a fixed, non-removable antenna. Not that hard, right? Well, next time you go on the airsoft field, take a good look around. You'll be surprised of how many people are not aware of this stuff and are actually breaking the law. As if airsoft isn't controversial enough already. Yet again, this is mostly due to people either being unaware and the crappy Chinese brands out there that don't give a shit about the laws in the rest of the world and produce stuff people buy here that they actually may not use over here. So again guys, and I can't say it enough, be aware of the stuff you buy. But if you're watching this, you're taking a step in the right direction, because that means you care about doing it right and without taking the risk of potentially harming our sport. So, thumbs up for you guys. Now, if you follow these restrictions, you will get a range of about a few hundred meters in an urban environment, while in a more open environment you will get a few kilometers. And that should be more than enough for airsoft usage. Okay, so furthermore, when it comes to the use of this license-free service, you are able to use 16 channels with analog FM devices. Digital radios that fall under the TDMA regulation can use the same 16 channels as the analog radios. And the digital ones that fall under the FDMA regulation can use up to 32 channels nowadays. Most radios you'll find today are built and programmed with the first 8 channels for analog and the first 16 for digital FDMA radios, since the newly added channels are only recently allowed since January 2018. Most radio manufacturers have pre-installed these license-free channels, and these can mostly be found as the first 8 up to 32 channels you are able to select on those devices. So for airsoft purpose, these are the channels organizations and marshals refer to what the different teams may use. For example, Team Red can use channel 1 and 2 and Team Blue may use channel 3 and 4. But some radios do not have these PMR channels installed already, and that requires you to do it manually. For this, it's possible you either need to do it through a computer, which requires some tech experience, or you can directly do it with a keypad on some radios. For this, you obviously need to know the correct frequencies. The list of these frequencies can be found by simply searching for the PMR 446 channels on Google. Another thing you need to know is, as I mentioned before, the frequency these things work on is the 446 MHz frequency. But in order to make people use different channels within that megahertz range and not be interfered by one another, the amount of kilohertz in these frequencies is adjusted. These are the numbers that you find after the 446 on those channel lists. Now some brands also add extra pre-installed sub-channels into their radios above the PMR 446 channels, but since these are sub-channels, they can also interfere with the regular PMR channels. So, that covers all regarding the legislation and technical terms. Let's go over to the radios themselves. As I told you regarding the frequencies, radios can be divided in both analog and digital radios. There's a difference between them and it's quite big. So let's start with the most common analog ones. Analog radios work by sending out a continuous stream of electrical signals. These signals can be easily interfered by other users and natural events such as storms, for example. The signals analog radios use also fade over distance until they reach their maximum distance and turn into white noise. When it comes to voices in loud background environments, they can be well heard and understood with analog radios. But for each channel, only one two-way conversation can take place at a moment. And when it comes to pricing, they are fairly cheap in general. The more modern digital radios, on the other hand, work by the use of mathematical code in block segments. And when it comes to these signals, they stay strong and clear over their entire range and can go better through concrete and walls, unlike the analog electrical signals. Such digital radios are provided with more features like status buttons and enhanced text messaging. They are also more reliable and allow for more simultaneous talking paths. Digital radios provide a clear sound with less interference, and also they can distinguish voices from background noises due to an algorithm. When it comes to battery life, they can last up to 30 to 50% longer than their analog competitors because a digital transmitter is not constantly on. Also, the defense against eavesdropping is much better with digital radios because the technology is much less common and not yet supported by most scanners. And like mentioned before, when we talked about frequencies, digital radios can also operate on analog frequencies, so they can be programmed to be compatible with analog radios. But the downside of these is that when near too much presence of radio frequency noises, they can result in an error, and digital radios are in general more pricey than the analog ones. So covering this info will already give you an important matter of what sort of device you should pick. But obviously there is more. So now that we covered these differences, we can go over to the different features that you may need for your specific usage. First off, we'll go over reliability and toughness regarding these devices, because there's nothing worse than spending money on stuff that dies after a few times of using it. Especially in more extreme outdoor environments, this is essential. A minimum we suggest to look out for if you do things like airsoft is a so-called ingress protection rating. This is always shown with an IP followed by 2 digits and sometimes another letter. This shows a level of protection against solids and water. The first number after IP refers to the strength against dust. This can be rated up to 6. The second number refers to moisture protection, which can be rated up to 9. And the last letter indicates additional information related to the protection of the device. The most common rating you'll find on these radios is the IP67 rating, which means the device is both dust-tight and watertight up to 30 minutes when submerged underwater up to 1 meter deep. If you find an IP rating with other numbers and don't know what they mean, you can look them up by searching for IP ratings on Google. For even more extreme situations, you can also look for the so-called ATEX rating. Just so you know, this means the device is made to work in explosive environments. And for even tougher devices, you may want to look out for a so-called MIL-STD 8110 rating. This United States military standard shows that the device has passed through a series of tests, going from resistance against low pressures to temperature shocks to fungus to pyro and gunfire shock and even acidic atmosphere. So if you want your stuff to be doomsday ready, you might want to get something that got a MIL-STD rating. Now, some brands divide their radios in so-called consumer and business models, whereas the business ones tend to be much tougher against abuse. But don't let that scare you off, because the business models can mostly also be bought by consumers as well. As long as they are license free, you should be fine. Another thing you want to pay attention to is the battery life, which is especially a necessity for those longer milsim events. For this, you surely want to look out for lithium-ion batteries, since these are light, have a fast charging rate, and have a slow loss of charge when you're not using them. Also remind that already the choice between an analog or a digital radio makes a huge difference in battery life for radio devices. Speaking of batteries, some radios are also equipped with a low voltage battery indicator, so you know when it's time to recharge or replace the battery by an extra charged one. So that's about it for the reliability and toughness features. Now, what does such a radio usually come with besides a battery? Of course, a battery charger is one, and some sort of clip to hook your device onto something. Also, one of the very basic things you'll find on such a device is a PTT button or push to talk. Like the word itself says, nothing very fancy about it. Just push the button to make your receiver into a transmitter and talk in the microphone to transmit your message.
What the hell are you?
I'm Batman.
For a more easier use, most radios are equipped with a mic jack. This enables you to connect the device to a microphone with a separate PTT or an external speaker, which allows you to use more tactical products like a headset, a throat mic or an earpiece, for example. Now, there are also things like dual PTT sets, differences in mic jacks, and like I just mentioned, a lot of different comm systems available on the market. But we'll cover that stuff in another video in the future. Like always, if we've made it, it will be available in the description down below. So, what other technological features can be useful? Possibly the most important basic features are the ability to lock your keypad so you don't accidentally switch channels, for example, and the so-called beep tones. If you've ever used a two-way radio, you might have noticed that some messages someone sends at you seem to start at the middle of the sentence. This is due to the fact that there's a small delay between pressing the PTT and the actual transmission. So if your buddy doesn't wait for a moment after pressing the PTT and immediately starts to talk, he will most likely get an answer like this back.
Could you repeat that, please? Because I didn't understand what you were saying.
To solve this issue, some radios are equipped with those beep tones or calling tones. This means your device makes a sound when it's ready to transmit your message, so you get feedback for when you may speak. A very common feature you also get on all these type of two-way radios is some sort of CTCSS or continuous tone coded squelch system, a DCS or digital coded squelch, a cell call function, also called selective calling function, or a XTCSS function.
Squelch.
A squelch system is used to suppress the channel noise when the radio is not receiving a transmission. But mind that a squelch function doesn't solve the interference issues with others, it just covers them up. Now, privacy of your communication is also a very important issue, especially for Airsoft and Milsim, because otherwise the enemy team knows exactly what you're up to, and then you can better throw away your radios and just yell at each other. So, for a more private communication, two-way radios are also equipped with a scramble function.
Scramble.
Which basically allows you to use the same frequency as others do, but you don't hear each other because of a unique code only you and your friends or teammates use.
This is an example to show you the scramble function.
Do notice that these functions don't privatize the channel you're using, it only minimizes chatter of others. Another function that's mostly available these days is a VOX or voice activated transmission. This function makes your radio start transmitting when you start to talk in the direction of the device.
Vox.
This allows for a hands-free use and doesn't require you to use the PTT. But the thing with the VOX function is that on most radios there's a slight delay, because the radio needs to recognize that you're talking to it. This means that the conversation can be clipped, and that's why most people repeat the first word to overcome this.
Viper, do you copy?
Another very common feature is the ability to scan with your device. This allows you to cruise through different channels to find active ones or to search for empty ones as well. And for the guys that want to listen to their favorite FM radio channel, that's also mostly an added feature. So these are the most common technological features, but of course some radio brands provide their devices with special extra functions. But it's for you to decide which features you really need. Of course, to use these functions I just mentioned, you need to read the manual, because these are somewhat slightly different to access for different brands and their models. And I think you and I both are not really in the mood to keep this going for another extra few hours. So, furthermore, when it comes to such technological features for the use of teamwork like in Airsoft or Milsim, it is recommended that everyone within the group either gets a device from the same brand or even the exact same radio. This will assure that everyone is able to use all the features if they require to. At last, a tip I can give you is you best search for the well-known quality radio brands out there. Like always, it will cost you more at the cash register, but they will serve you a very long time. Furthermore, don't forget to participate in our dope monthly giveaways on our social media or ReconBrothers.com. Who knows, you might be the next lucky fella winning a quality product. Let us know in the comments down below what radio you currently use. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell button to show your appreciation for our videos. We thank you for watching and we'll see you guys next week. For this you obviously need to work by the use of when it comes to voices in loud background environment.